The box was small. Too small. I knew before I tore the wrapping that it wasn't what I had hoped for. My sister's gift sat beside me, a glossy designer bag with a gold emblem shining under the soft glow of the Christmas tree. I could see her fingers still resting possessively on the strap, like it was already part of her. My own package fit neatly into the palm of my hand, light as paper. The room smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles, yet all I could taste was disappointment. I peeled the tape carefully, not wanting to appear ungrateful. Inside, tucked into a plain white envelope, was a holiday card. The kind you pick up in the discount bin at the drugstore. $2, maybe less. What would you do if 29 years of being second best came crashing down in one moment? Don't look away, this story will stay with you until the very end. I forced a smile. My sister let out a delighted laugh, lifting her Gucci bag higher for everyone to see. Isn't it gorgeous? She beamed, twirling the gold chain so it caught the firelight. My mother nodded proudly, my father chuckled in agreement. The spotlight was on her as always. No one even glanced my way. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. Thank you, I said softly, running my fingers along the cheap, glittery surface of the card. The edges left faint flecks of gold dust on my hands. My voice was calm, steady. Too steady. If anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed the difference. But no one ever did. The clock above the mantel ticked. 7:42 p.m. The kind of detail you don't forget when your life tilts in a new direction. I sat back, listening to the familiar hum of conversation around me. My sister gushed about a party she was invited to. My parents asked questions, eager, leaning forward like she was the only star in the room. My card lay forgotten on my lap, flimsy and weightless, but my mind was anything but. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to see, was that I had been quietly preparing for this moment. For years I had saved scraps of strength the way other people save pennies in jars. Every insult, every dismissal, every time I was pushed aside had been tucked away. Tonight that jar tipped over, spilling everything into me at once. I wasn't angry. Not in the way they expected. No, anger burns too hot too fast. I was cool, collected. Ice where fire should have been. And I had one advantage. One secret. The fire popped in the hearth, sending sparks up the chimney. My sister shrieked with laughter at something my father said. The warmth in that room wasn't meant for me, and it never had been. I let my eyes wander, landing on the decorations hung too high, the stockings unevenly placed. My sister's stocking bulged with gifts, mine sagged nearly empty. Even the little details whispered favoritism. I caught my mother's gaze for a brief second. She smiled politely, then looked away as though my presence required no more than that. That's when the weight of the card pressed into me, not in my hands but in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the bag or the card. It was the message. Clear, sharp, impossible to ignore. You don't matter. I swallowed hard, the air thick with pine and smoke. It's lovely, I repeated, my voice cutting through the chatter. My sister glanced at me briefly, her smirk faint. He knew. He always knew. She thrived on it. A clink of glasses drew my attention. My aunt raised a toast from across the table, her red lipstick leaving marks on the rim of her wineglass. To family, she said cheerfully. May we always stick together. The irony stung. I lifted my glass halfway, then set it down untouched. My throat was too tight. They laughed, clapped, sipped their wine. I folded the card closed, its cheap glitter catching the light just enough to mock me. Then something small happened, something no one noticed but me. My sister leaned toward my mother and whispered. Their laughter followed, hushed but cruel. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I had been the punchline all my life. My chest tightened, but my expression never cracked. If anything, my smile deepened. That calmness unnerved me. My sister's eyes flicked to mine briefly, questioning. He had never seen me this still, this composed. The television flickered in the background, muted commercials painting color on the walls. Snow drifted outside, soft against the window panes. It was almost peaceful, almost cinematic, except for the storm brewing inside me. I shifted in my seat, straightened my back. Every movement deliberate. It fits her well, I said, nodding toward the Gucci bag. My voice was even, complimenting, but my tone held something sharper. My sister blinked. For once she didn't have a quick reply. My father chuckled to fill the silence, lifting another slice of pie onto his plate. I let the pause linger, a thread pulled tight across the room. I could feel the weight of years pressing down on me. Birthdays missed, achievements dismissed, sacrifices unseen. But with it came clarity. I wasn't losing my place in this family tonight. I was giving it up. I was letting them keep their spotlight, their chosen one. And in stepping away, I was stepping into something they couldn't control. I traced the edge of the card with my thumb. My nails left faint dents in the cheap paper. My sister's perfume drifted across the table, sweet, overpowering. The sound of cutlery scraped plates. The fire hissed. The house felt too warm, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in. And yet my heart was steady. "You're awfully quiet tonight," my aunt observed, tilting her head toward me. All eyes turned briefly in my direction. A rare moment, a spotlight I hadn't asked for. I lifted the card higher, smiling politely. "Just thinking," I said. "What about?" my mother asked, her tone absent, distracted. I looked straight at her. "How one gift can tell you everything you need to know." Her brows furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. But before she could respond, my sister laughed loudly, pulling the attention back to herself. "Oh, she's just being dramatic," she said. But I didn't look away. The room blurred at the edges, the voices dulling. All I saw was my sister, all I heard was her laughter, and all I felt was the weight of 29 years pressing me down, and finally breaking something free. My lips curved, but my eyes were cold. "Dramatic," I echoed softly. "Maybe." The clock ticked again, 7:53 now. 11 minutes had passed, but it felt like a lifetime. I leaned forward, resting my card gently on the table, sliding it toward the center where everyone could see. The cheap glitter caught in the firelight one last time, flashing like a warning. My sister narrowed her eyes, sensing something she couldn't name. I looked at her, steady, unblinking. "Enjoy your gift," I said. My voice was calm, but my words carried something heavy, final. The laughter around the table faltered. The fire popped, the clock ticked, and silence pressed against the walls. For the first time that evening I had their attention. And I wasn't about to let it go. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the chatter like a blade. My sister stiffened, her hands curling protectively around her new bag. My parents looked confused, caught between curiosity and irritation. "I think I've had enough for tonight," I said quietly, though my words carried clearly across the table. No one stopped me, not at first. They just stared as though I had broken some unspoken rule. My aunt set down her wineglass, the clink sharpened the silence. The air was heavy, too warm from the fire and crowded room. My palms were damp, but my heart beat steady. I stood tall, gathering my coat from the back of the chair. The card still lay on the table where I had placed it, glitter catching the light like an accusation. "Don't be ridiculous," my mother finally said, her tone sharp but dismissive. "Sit back down. It's Christmas." I met her eyes, calm, unblinking. "Exactly," I said. "And that's why I'm leaving." The cold air outside wrapped around me like a shock the moment I stepped out the front door. It was sharp, biting, clean. Nothing like the stifling heat of the dining room. Snow crunched beneath my boots, each step deliberate, steady. Behind me voices rose. Muffled, urgent. My sister's laughter had stopped. I could hear my father calling my name once, then again louder, but there was no movement to follow. They didn't come after me. They never had. I paused at the edge of the driveway, breath clouding in the frozen air. The house glowed behind me, warm yellow lights spilling out from every window. From outside it looked perfect, storybook perfect. But I knew better. I wrapped my coat tighter, the fabric rough against my chin. For the first time in years I didn't feel small. I felt separate. Detached. As though I had finally stepped outside the invisible role they had written for me. The silence of the night was soothing. Only the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the distant hum of a neighbor's car broke it. My hands shook slightly in my pockets, not from fear but from release. For 29 years I had endured those dinners, those birthdays, those endless comparisons. My sister the shining star. Me the shadow. But tonight, by leaving, I was rewriting that story. And yet a strange unease crept in. Not doubt exactly, but something deeper. Question, what now? I stopped at the corner where the streetlight flickered weakly, snow piling high around its base. My breath rose in clouds, vanishing into the dark sky. For a brief moment I closed my eyes, listening. That's when I realized something. They weren't calling anymore. They had let me go. The truth hit harder than I expected. It wasn't surprise, it was confirmation. They never wanted me to stay. A sudden rustle caught my attention. Across the street, my neighbor Mrs. Collins was shoveling her driveway, bundled in a faded blue coat. She looked up, startled to see me standing there. "Cold night to be out," she called softly, her breath white against the dark. I forced a smile, lifting a hand. "Needed some air." She nodded knowingly, her expression kind but guarded. I could see the curiosity in her eyes, the questions she didn't ask. Around here, neighbors always noticed more than they said. As I turned away, her words lingered. Needed some air. Sounded harmless, but inside me it meant so much more. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the weight of years behind. The walk stretched on. My boots sank into the snow, each step harder than the last. Street after street passed quietly, houses glowing warm behind frosted windows. Families gathered inside, laughter spilling faintly through thin walls. For the first time I didn't envy them. Their warmth, their closeness, it no longer mattered. I wasn't chasing what I would never have. I was done. But as I walked, my mind replayed the scene over and over. The card, the laughter, the whispers. My chest tightened, not with sorrow but with clarity. They had made their choice and so had I. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound startled me in the quiet night. I pulled it out, the screen glowing cold blue against my gloves. One missed call. My father. One text. My sister. "You're overreacting." I stared at the words, a bitter laugh catching in my throat. Overreacting. After decades of silence, neglect, and dismissal, that was her response. I didn't reply. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the weight of it pressing against me like an anchor I was finally ready to drop. By the time I reached the end of the street, my toes were numb, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I stopped at another corner, the wind whipping harder here. My hair stung my cheeks, snowflakes clinging stubbornly to my lashes. I glanced back, half expecting someone to follow. But the street behind me was empty, the house I had left now hidden by the curve of the road. The loneliness should have hurt, but instead it felt freeing. I thought of all the years I had stayed, hoping they would notice, hoping something would change. And I realized, leaving was not weakness. It was power. I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking away from chains. Each step carried a different memory. My 13th birthday, when my sister's gift was a bicycle and mine a sweater 2 sizes too big. The graduation where they cheered her name and clapped politely for me. The countless dinners where my words were drowned out by hers. Every slight, every dismissal, every forgotten moment, they replayed not as pain now but as proof. Proof that I had survived, that I had endured, and that I could leave without regret. As I approached the small bridge at the end of the neighborhood, the water below frozen solid, I stopped. The silence here was deeper, heavier. Only the creak of tree branches and the whistle of wind filled the air. I leaned against the railing, my fingers cold against the iron. For a moment I let myself breathe long and slow. And then I whispered into the night, "Never again." The words vanished into the dark, but they were real, solid, binding. Behind me, faintly, I heard the crunch of footsteps. My body stiffened, my heart quickened. I turned slowly, scanning the snowy path. No one. Just the sound of branches shaking loose their snow. Still the unease lingered. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Because I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. I pushed off the railing, squaring my shoulders. My legs ached, my fingers stung, but I felt stronger than I had in years. The cold no longer bit. It braced me, hardened me. The house behind me was gone from sight. Ahead lay only shadows and silence. But for the first time I wasn't afraid of either. I walked on, my steps steady, my resolve sharper with every crunch of snow beneath me. And though I didn't look back, I could still feel their faces in my mind. Their shock, their whispers, their confusion. They thought I was walking away. But the truth was, I was walking toward something else. Something they weren't ready for. That thought kept me company as I walked on, my boots crunching into the fresh layer of snow. The night was still, almost unnaturally so. My breath rose in quick puffs of white, dissolving into the cold air. The silence wrapped around me, pressing in, but instead of feeling lonely, I found comfort in it. For years, noise had been my enemy. The constant chatter of my sister's praise, the empty congratulations tossed my way, the careless laughter that always excluded me. Now the quiet felt like freedom. I slowed my pace, letting the stillness sink into me. With each step I felt lighter, as if shedding years of being overlooked. Yet beneath that calm surface something else stirred. Not anger, it was sharper, colder. Something closer to resolve. I stopped under a street lamp, its light flickering faintly, snowflakes swirling through its beam. My shadow stretched long across the sidewalk, thinner than I remembered, yet stronger too. I leaned against the icy metal pole, catching my breath. The truth was clear now. They wouldn't chase me. They never would. In their world I had already walked out countless times, invisible even when I stayed. Tonight only made it official. But with that realization came a question that settled heavy in my chest. If I no longer belonged to them, then who was I to become? The thought tightened my throat. I pressed a gloved hand against the cold metal of the pole, grounding myself. For the first time in decades the answer was mine to decide. I didn't rush home. Instead I wandered, my path unplanned. The neighborhood was quiet, windows glowing softly, families gathered inside. I wondered how many other tables had their own unspoken rivalries, their own invisible daughters. Maybe I wasn't alone. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done playing second place in mine. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I ignored it this time. I didn't need to read another hollow message. Their words had lost weight. What mattered now was my silence. It was powerful, I realized. Silence left them guessing, unsettled. They couldn't dismiss what they couldn't define. And in that space I was free to think, to plan. As I turned a corner, the sharp smell of wood smoke drifted from a chimney, mixing with the crisp scent of snow. My stomach growled faintly. I hadn't eaten much dinner, too distracted by everything else. I considered stopping at the corner diner a few blocks away. The thought of sitting alone in a booth, warm coffee between my hands, sounded appealing. Not because I was hungry, but because it would give me time to think. I pushed open the door 15 minutes later, the bell jingling overhead. Warmth and the smell of bacon wrapped around me instantly. A few late-night patrons glanced up but quickly returned to their meals. The waitress, a woman about my age with tired eyes and a kind smile, waved me toward a booth by the window. I slid into the seat, the vinyl cold against my legs. The menu was sticky, the pages worn, but I didn't bother opening it. "Just coffee," I told her when she approached. She nodded, jotting it down. "Cold night to be out walking." I gave a small smile. "Needed some air." Her expression softened. She didn't pry, but something in her eyes told me she understood more than she let on. The coffee came hot and bitter, steam curling up into the light above. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my fingers. For a while I just sat there watching the snow fall heavier outside. The silence here was different. Not the suffocating quiet of my parents' table, not the biting cold of the empty street. This silence felt alive, waiting. I pulled my phone out finally, setting it face down on the table. It vibrated once more, a faint buzz against the wood. I didn't turn it over. I didn't need to see their names to know what the messages said. Apologies that weren't really apologies. Excuses. Attempts to pull me back into the role they'd carved for me. But I wasn't going back. Not this time. Instead, I pulled out a small notebook from my coat pocket. I'd carried it for months, almost without knowing why. Its pages were mostly blank, but tonight it felt different, necessary. I opened to the first page, the paper crisp beneath my pen. I didn't write a diary entry. I didn't pour out feelings. Instead, I began making a list. A quiet inventory of every moment I had been overlooked, every memory where I had been pushed aside. Not to dwell on them, but to sharpen them. Each line was fuel, proof, and in some way preparation. By the time the waitress refilled my coffee, 2 pages were filled. My handwriting looked steadier than it had in years. "You're working on something important," she said softly, glancing at the notebook. I met her eyes and smiled faintly. "Yes," I said. "Very important." I stayed until the diner closed, then stepped back into the snow, notebook tucked safely inside my coat. The streets were emptier now, the silence even heavier. But inside me something had shifted. The plan wasn't clear yet, it didn't need to be. What mattered was that I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. As I walked home, I thought of my sister's face when I stood up from the table. The flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had always thrived on my reactions. Tears, anger, silence. But tonight I had given her something new. Calm. And calm unsettled her more than anything else. When I finally unlocked my front door, the familiar creak echoed through the quiet house. It was colder inside than out, the air still and untouched. I hung my coat, set the notebook on the kitchen table and lit a small lamp. The space was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt mine. I made tea, the steam rising fragrant and warm, and sat with my notebook again. I traced the list, rereading it slowly. Each line was a scar, but together they formed something else. Something sharper. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to confront them tonight. My silence would do the work. It would linger in their minds, gnawing at them. And in that silence I would grow stronger. The clock on my wall ticked past midnight. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the world in white. I sipped my tea, pen poised over the next blank page. My sister's words replayed in my head. You're overreacting. I smiled, slow and deliberate. She had no idea. Because this wasn't overreaction. This was preparation. When I finally closed the notebook, my hands felt steady, my mind sharper. I left it on the table, the lamp casting a pool of light over it. I climbed into bed, the sheets cold but comforting. As I lay in the dark, listening to the distant wind rattle the windows, I whispered one word into the silence. Soon. The word disappeared into the stillness, but it stayed with me. I didn't know the full shape of the plan yet. But I knew one thing for certain. My silence was no longer weakness. It was my weapon. A weapon. That's what my silence had become. But weapons aren't meant to stay sheathed forever. They wait patiently until the cracks begin to show. The first crack came quietly weeks later when I saw my sister in the grocery store. I hadn't planned it, hadn't been seeking her out. I was simply pushing my cart down the cereal aisle when I heard her voice, bright and confident as always, but thinner somehow. She stood near the end cap, phone pressed to her ear, her Gucci bag swinging from her shoulder. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I know, she said quickly. I'll fix it. Just give me more time. Her voice wavered on the word time. I ducked behind a shelf of canned soup, hidden but listening. My heart beat steady, not with fear but with awareness. The golden image she had built around herself was slipping, even if no one else noticed. When she hung up, her hand lingered on her bag, gripping the strap too tight. For the first time she looked small. I didn't approach her. Not yet. I pushed my cart in the opposite direction, leaving her with her forced smile and brittle charm. But inside something shifted. The cracks were real. And I wasn't imagining them. At home that night I opened my notebook again, adding another line. Not just another grievance, but an observation. She is unraveling. The words steadied me. For so long she had been untouchable, coated in layers of praise and protection. But now, for reasons I didn't yet know, the shield was thinning. And I intended to watch every piece fall away. It didn't take long to see more signs. At a cousin's birthday gathering she arrived late, makeup perfect but eyes shadowed. She laughed a little too loudly, her voice catching. When someone asked about her new job, she dodged the question with practiced ease, changing the subject. I stayed quiet, sipping my tea in the corner, letting others fill the space. But my silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, deliberate. At one point my aunt leaned toward me, her voice low. She doesn't seem herself lately, does she? I tilted my head, feigning neutrality. You think so? Yes, she whispered, frowning. It's strange. I nodded once, saying nothing more. But inside I smiled. Not out of cruelty but recognition. For years I had been invisible. Now for the first time they were seeing her falter, and noticing me. Another crack came in a phone call. This time she was the one who reached out. My screen lit up with her name late one evening, unexpected. I answered, my tone calm. Hello. Her voice was tight, rushed. Have you heard anything? About me? I frowned. What do you mean? She exhaled sharply. Just, if people are talking. You know how this family is. I let the pause stretch, long enough to make her uneasy. I haven't heard anything, I said truthfully. But I didn't add the part she was desperate to know. People were talking. And they weren't praising her anymore. The silence unsettled her. Okay, she said quickly, forcing lightness into her voice. Just checking. Forget I called. Before I could respond she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long moment. The golden child calling me? It was a shift, subtle but undeniable. I wrote another line in my notebook, "She is afraid." It wasn't just her. My parents too began to show small cracks. At the next family dinner I attended, months after the Christmas I had walked out, they seemed distracted, their smiles strained. My father's jokes fell flat. My mother's eyes darted between me and my sister as though measuring something she couldn't quite place. I didn't push. I didn't question. I simply observed, sipping water, answering politely, and letting the silence stretch around me like armor. At one point my mother asked me to pass the salt. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to mask it. A tiny detail, but I noticed. She wasn't as certain anymore, not as firm in her dismissal. The turning point, though, came on a rainy afternoon when I ran into an old friend of my sister's at the library. We hadn't spoken in years, but she recognized me instantly. "You're her sister, aren't you?" she said, lowering her voice. "Yes," I replied cautiously. Her expression softened with pity. "She's not doing well, is she? I heard things. About money, about her job." "It's just rumors, but," she trailed off, shaking her head. I didn't confirm or deny. I simply listened, my face neutral. But inside, the puzzle pieces began to align. The Gucci bag, the late arrivals, the strained phone calls. Beneath the polished surface, her life was cracking open. That night I wrote more in my notebook. "Her image is collapsing. They don't want to see it yet, but they will." The words steadied me, sharpened me. I wasn't inventing a plan anymore. I was watching one unfold. My silence had become more than a weapon. It was a mirror reflecting their choices back at them. But silence is not without weight. Some nights, it pressed on me, heavy and suffocating. Alone in my house, I questioned myself. Was I cruel for waiting, for watching her falter without reaching out? I made tea, sat by the window, and let the questions swirl with the steam. And every time the answer came the same. No. Because for 29 years I had reached out. And every time they had turned away. Now I was learning the strength of standing still. The family began to notice. At another dinner, my uncle asked my sister a casual question about her work. He stumbled, fumbling for words. For once, all eyes didn't rush to comfort her. Some turned to me instead, curious, measuring. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met their gazes calmly, letting the silence speak. My sister flushed, her laugh brittle. "I'm fine," she insisted, a little too loudly. But I saw the panic in her eyes. Later that evening, as we stood near the door, she leaned close. "You think you're better than me now, don't you?" she hissed, her voice low. I met her stare, steady. "No," I said softly. "I think I'm finally equal." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time she had no reply. The cracks widened. Rumors spread, small at first, then louder. Relatives whispered, neighbors speculated. And through it all I stayed silent. Watching. Waiting. It wasn't vengeance yet, not fully. It was patience, stretched thin but unbreaking. Because the cracks were only the beginning. And I knew deep in my bones the break was coming. It arrived sooner than I expected. A stormy Sunday afternoon, rain hammering the windows, wind rattling the loose shutters. I had settled into my chair with a cup of tea, notebook open on the table beside me. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and wet earth. I was at peace until the knock came. 3 sharp raps, quick and urgent. I set my cup down, heart steady. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, there they stood, my sister in front, my parents just behind her. Their clothes were damp from the rain, their expressions tight and uncertain. My sister's makeup had smudged under her eyes, and she clutched her empty handbag like a lifeline. For the first time in my life, I saw desperation in her face. She spoke first, her voice brittle. "I need your help." The words hung between us, heavy, almost unreal. Behind her, my mother cleared her throat nervously. "She's been going through difficulties," she said, as if the word could soften reality. My father said nothing, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't step aside. I let the rain soak into the silence, let them feel the weight of standing outside my door. "What kind of help?" I asked finally, my tone calm, measured. My sister's voice cracked. "Money. A place to stay. Just something." Her words tumbled out quickly, rushed, as though the admission itself was painful. I studied her face, the woman who had been handed everything while I received scraps. The woman who laughed when I was overlooked, who whispered in corners, who thrived while I disappeared. Now she was unraveling, threads pulled loose until nothing remained. My mother tried to interject, her voice pleading. She just needs time, that's all. We thought you might understand. Understand? The words stung. For decades they hadn't cared to understand me. I took a slow breath, feeling the warmth of my home at my back and the chill of the storm pressing against my front. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I do understand, I said softly. Their eyes flickered with hope. I let the pause linger, then added, and that's why I can't help you. My sister's mouth fell open. My mother gasped. My father finally looked up, his face pale with shock. You can't mean that, my mother whispered. I do, I replied, steady, unshaken. For years I was invisible in your house. For years she was the only one who mattered. And now you come to me? When she's broken, when you have nowhere else to go. The rain pounded harder, drowning out their silence. My sister stepped forward, anger flashing through her tears. You're cruel, she spat. You've been waiting for this. I held her gaze. You're right. I have. The words stunned her into silence. For so long I had been the one defending myself, justifying my place. Tonight I needed no justification. You always said I overreacted, I continued. But this isn't reaction. This is choice. By choice. My father shifted uncomfortably. She's still your sister, he said, his voice low. I nodded once. Yes. And I was still your daughter. But that never seemed to matter. The words cut deeper than any shout could. I saw it in the way my mother flinched, in the way my father's lips pressed tight. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the rain against the roof, relentless. Finally my sister's voice cracked again. Please, she whispered. Just let me in. Her hand lifted slightly as if to push past me. Instinctively I stepped into the doorway, blocking the path. Behind me the warmth of my home glowed golden, safe and calm. Ahead of me the storm raged, soaking them to the bone. No, I said quietly. The single word held all the weight of 30 years. My mother's face crumpled. You'll regret this, she said sharply, but her voice shook. I straightened my shoulders. No. I've regretted enough already. The silence stretched again, taut and final. My sister's tears mingled with the rain. For once she had no audience to applaud, no parents to shield her, no spotlight to save her. Only me. And I was done saving her. I reached for the edge of the door, my fingers firm on the wood. You wanted me invisible, I said, my voice steady but cold. Now in my world you don't exist. And with that I closed the door. The sound echoed through the house, louder than I expected. A clean, solid thud that seemed to seal more than wood. On the other side, muffled voices rose, pleading, frustrated, angry. I stood still, hand pressed against the door, listening as the storm swallowed them. Slowly their footsteps faded, leaving only the rain. Inside my home was quiet, calm. The lamp still glowed on the table, my notebook waiting, pages filled with the story that had led me here. I walked back to the chair, sat down and lifted my cup of tea. The liquid was still warm. For the first time in my life I felt whole. Not because they had finally seen me, not because I had forced their acknowledgement, but because I had chosen myself. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, final. By closing the door I had ended decades of chasing scraps, ended the cycle of begging for love they never intended to give. I hadn't just walked away. I had shut them out for good. I opened my notebook one last time, pen scratching across the page. The day I stopped being second best was the day I stopped letting them through the door. I set the pen down, my hand steady, my heart lighter. The storm raged outside, but inside there was peace. True, unshakable peace. And as I leaned back, letting the quiet fill me, one final thought crossed my mind, clear, sharp, and freeing. Some doors are meant to close forever. If this story hit you deep, you're not alone. Subscribe now for more powerful revenge and betrayal stories that prove silence can be the sharpest weapon.